The Christmas afternoon sun cast long shadows across the frost-covered fields of Paradise Valley, Wyoming Territory, as 9-year-old Lucy Crawford walked along the fence line that separated her family's struggling homestead from the prosperous Miller farm next door. In her small hand, she clutched a simple gold ring, her most treasured possession, and the only thing she owned. That had belonged to her late mother. Lucy's father, Thomas Crawford, watched from their cabin's window as his daughter made her way toward the neighboring property. At 34, Thomas was a man worn down by 3 years of drought, failed crops, and the constant struggle to maintain their small farm without his wife Margaret, who had died in childbirth 2 years earlier. "Lucy, where are you going?" Thomas called out, stepping onto their rickety front porch to give Mr. Miller his Christmas present. "Papa," Lucy replied, holding up the ring so her father could see it glinting in the winter sunlight. Thomas felt his heart sink. The ring had been Margaret's wedding band, and Lucy had treasured it as her only connection to the mother she barely remembered. The thought of his daughter giving away something so precious worried him deeply. "Lucy, sweetheart, that ring belonged to your mother. Are you sure you want to give it away?" Lucy stopped walking and turned to face her father with the serious expression she wore when she had thought carefully about something important. "Papa, you always said that Christmas is about giving the most special things we have to people who need them. Mr. Miller lost his wife too, and he looks so sad all the time. Maybe Mama's ring will remind him that someone cares about him." Thomas struggled with conflicting emotions. He was proud of his daughter's generous heart, but the ring was irreplaceable, their only valuable possession and Lucy's sole inheritance from her mother. "But Lucy, we don't really know Mr. Miller very well. He keeps to himself, and that's why he needs a friend, Papa. Lonely people need friends the most." Before Thomas could protest further, Lucy had resumed her determined march toward the Miller property. Thomas followed at a distance, curious and concerned about how their reclusive neighbor would react to such an unexpected gesture. Jacob Miller was 52 years old and had been farming in Paradise Valley for over 20 years. His property was the most successful in the area, with well-maintained buildings, healthy livestock, and fields that seemed to produce good crops even during difficult seasons. But Jacob's success had come at the cost of almost complete isolation from his neighbors. Jacob's wife, Sarah, had died 5 years earlier during a particularly harsh winter, and since then, he had withdrawn from community life, rarely speaking to anyone except when business required it. The other homesteaders respected his farming skills but had learned to leave him alone, understanding that his grief had made him inhospitable to friendship or conversation. Lucy found Jacob in his barn, tending to a horse that appeared to have injured its leg. She watched for a moment as the large, bearded man worked with gentle hands to examine the animal's wound, speaking in soft, reassuring tones that revealed a kindness his reputation didn't suggest. "Mr. Miller," Lucy called out politely, not wanting to startle him. Jacob looked up in surprise. He rarely had visitors, and never children. "What are you doing here, little girl? Is everything all right at your father's place?" "Everything's fine, sir. I'm Lucy Crawford. I live next door with my papa." Jacob nodded, recognizing her though they had never been formally introduced. "I know who you are. What do you need?" Lucy approached carefully, sensing that Jacob was more uncomfortable than unfriendly. "I don't need anything. Mr. Miller, I brought you something." "Brought me something?" Jacob straightened up, confused by this unexpected development. Lucy held out the gold ring, which seemed to catch every ray of sunlight that filtered through the barn's windows. "It's a Christmas present. It was my mama's ring, but I thought you might like to have it." Jacob stared at the ring, then at the serious-faced little girl offering it to him. "Child, I can't accept your mother's ring. That's far too valuable a gift. But it's Christmas, and you don't have anybody to give you presents. Everyone should get something special on Christmas." Jacob felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had kept carefully buried for 5 years. This child's simple kindness was touching a part of his heart that he had thought was permanently closed. "Lucy, why would you want to give me such a precious thing? You don't even know me." Lucy considered this question with the thoughtfulness she brought to all important matters. I know you're sad like my papa gets sad sometimes when he thinks about Mama, and I know you take good care of your animals because I see you with them. And I know you must be lonely because you never have visitors or go to town for the church socials." Jacob felt tears threatening, the first tears he had allowed himself to shed since Sarah's funeral. This child had seen through his defensive isolation to the grief and loneliness underneath. "Lucy," Jacob said gently, kneeling down to her level, "this ring is beautiful, and I'm honored that you would think to give it to me. But are you absolutely certain you want to part with something that belonged to your mother?" "I'm certain," Lucy replied firmly. "Mama would want her ring to help someone feel less alone." Jacob accepted the ring with trembling hands, and as he examined it more closely, his expression changed from gratitude to shock. The inside of the band bore an inscription that he recognized immediately: "To Sarah, with all my love, J.M., June 15, 1867. The ring that Lucy Crawford had just given him was the wedding band he had placed on his own wife's finger 22 years earlier, the ring that had disappeared from Sarah's jewelry box shortly before her death, leading Jacob to assume it had been lost or stolen. "Lucy," Jacob said carefully, his voice shaking, "where did your mother get this ring?" "I don't know, Mr. Miller. Papa said it was hers before she married him. She never talked about where it came from." Jacob's mind raced as he considered the implications. Margaret Crawford, the woman who had lived next door for 3 years before her death, had possessed his late wife's wedding ring. But how and why had she never mentioned the connection? As Jacob struggled to understand this mystery, Thomas Crawford approached the barn, having watched the exchange between his daughter and their neighbor with growing concern. "Lucy, there you are," Thomas said, though his attention was immediately drawn to Jacob's pale, shocked expression. "Is everything all right, Mr. Miller?" Jacob looked up at Thomas, holding the ring in his palm like a sacred object. "Thomas, I need to ask you something very important. This ring that Lucy just gave me, do you know where your wife got it?" Thomas glanced at the ring, recognizing it immediately. That was Margaret's wedding ring. "She had it when I met her." "Why do you ask?" "Because," Jacob said slowly, "this ring belonged to my wife Sarah. I put it on her finger on our wedding day. In 1867, the three of them stood in the barn's golden afternoon light, surrounded by the gentle sounds of animals and the weight of a revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about the connections between their families." Lucy looked between the two men, sensing that her simple act of Christmas kindness had uncovered something much larger and more complicated than she had intended. "Does this mean," Lucy asked with the directness that only children possess, "that there's a story we don't know about?" Jacob and Thomas exchanged glances, both beginning to realize that Margaret Crawford's possession of Sarah Miller's wedding ring suggested a connection between their wives that neither of them had known existed, a connection that would transform their understanding of their past and their possibilities for the future. That evening, Jacob Miller found himself doing something he hadn't done in 5 years, sitting at a neighbor's kitchen table, sharing a meal and conversation. Thomas had insisted that Jacob join them for Christmas dinner, partly out of gratitude for his kindness to Lucy, but mostly because both men were desperate to understand the mystery of the ring. Lucy sat between the two men, proud that her Christmas gift had brought their reclusive neighbor into their home. Though she sensed that the adults were struggling with emotions she didn't fully comprehend. "Jacob," Thomas said carefully as they finished their simple meal of venison and root vegetables, "I need to ask you some questions about your wife, if you're comfortable talking about her." Jacob nodded, fingering the wedding ring that now rested on the table between them. "I haven't talked about Sarah to anyone in years, but I think it's time I tried. What was her full name?" "Before you married, Sarah Elizabeth Montgomery. She came to Paradise Valley from Denver in 1866. Said she was looking for a fresh start after some family troubles back east." Thomas felt his heart begin to race. "Jacob, Margaret's maiden name was Montgomery. Margaret and Montgomery." The two men stared at each other as the implications began to sink in. Lucy looked up from the cornbread she was eating. "Does that mean Mama and Mrs. Miller were sisters?" "It's possible," Thomas said quietly. "Margaret never talked much about her family. She said there had been some kind of falling out, and she had lost touch with her relatives. Jacob's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah had a younger sister named Margaret. They were separated when their parents died, and Sarah always regretted that they had never reconciled before she left Denver. What happened between them? Thomas asked. Jacob struggled with memories he had kept buried for decades. From what Sarah told me, there had been a disagreement about their parents' estate. Margaret felt that Sarah had received more than her fair share of the inheritance. Sarah tried to make things right, but Margaret was too proud and angry to accept help. Thomas began to piece together a story that explains so much about his late wife's reserved nature and reluctance to discuss her past. So Margaret came to Wyoming Territory still carrying that anger, and Sarah spent 22 years wondering if her sister had ever forgiven her. Jacob added sadly, Lucy had been listening to this conversation with growing understanding. So Mama and Mrs. Miller were sisters, but they never knew they were living right next to each other. It appears that way. Thomas confirmed. Jacob picked up the wedding ring and studied it again. But this raises another question. How did Margaret end up with Sarah's ring? Thomas thought back to his wife's final days. Margaret was very sick after Lucy was born. She kept talking about making things right, about mistakes she had made. One day, she asked me to bring her a small wooden box from our bedroom. I assumed it was just her jewelry, but she spent a long time looking through it, like she was searching for something specific. What did she find? I don't know. But a few days before she died, she asked me to promise that if anything happened to her, I would make sure Lucy knew that love was more important than pride, and that family connections were worth fighting for. Jacob felt tears forming in his eyes. Sarah made me promise something very similar before she died. She said that if I ever found her sister Margaret, I should tell her that she had been forgiven and that the ring belonged to whoever needed it most. Lucy looked between the two men with the wisdom that sometimes comes to children in moments of adult revelation. I think maybe they both knew they were sisters, and they were trying to find a way to make up through us. The possibility hung in the air between them that Sarah Miller and Margaret Crawford had somehow discovered their connection during their final years, but had been too proud or uncertain to approach each other directly, instead leaving clues and messages for their families to discover after their deaths. There's one way to find out for certain, Thomas said, standing up from the table. Margaret kept a journal. I've never read it because it felt too private, but maybe now. Thomas retrieved a small leather-bound book from Margaret's belongings and returned to the kitchen table. As he opened it, his hands shook slightly at the prospect of learning secrets his wife had never shared with him. The journal's final entries, written during Margaret's last weeks of life, confirmed their suspicions. December 10, 1887. I saw Sarah working in her garden today. She's grown into such a beautiful woman, and her husband seems kind. I want so desperately to tell her who I am, but I'm afraid she still hates me for the terrible things I said all those years ago. December 15, 1887. Sarah left vegetables on our porch again. She's been doing small kindnesses for months, and I think she knows who I am too. We're both too proud to speak first, but maybe we can find another way to heal this old wound. December 20th, 1887. I've decided to give Sarah's ring to my Lucy when she's old enough to understand. Sarah gave it to me the Christmas before we quarreled, saying she wanted me to have something beautiful to remember our love by. I kept it through all these angry years, and now I want it to be a bridge between our families when the time is right. Jacob wiped tears from his eyes as Thomas finished reading. They knew, they both knew, and they were trying to fix things without having to admit they'd been wrong. And now they have, Lucy said simply, because I gave you the ring, and now we know we're family. Thomas looked at his daughter with amazement. Lucy, do you understand what you've done? You've helped two families find each other. I just wanted Mr. Miller to have a nice Christmas, Lucy replied. But I'm glad we're related. Does this mean he could be like an uncle to me? Jacob felt his heart opening in ways it hadn't for years. Lucy, I would be honored to be your uncle. And, Thomas, I think our wives would be very pleased to know that their families are finally together. As the three of them sat in the warm glow of the oil lamps, they began to understand that Margaret and Sarah's long-lost promise to each other had finally been fulfilled. through the innocent generosity of a 9-year-old girl who simply wanted to make someone less lonely on Christmas Day. The ring that had represented separation and regret for over 20 years had become a symbol of reconciliation and new beginnings, proving that love and family connections are stronger than pride and old wounds. The weeks following Christmas brought changes to Paradise Valley that surprised everyone, including Jacob and Thomas themselves. What had started as the revelation of a family connection had evolved into a partnership that benefited both their farms and created a sense of community that neither man had experienced in years. Jacob had begun spending his evenings at the Crawford cabin, sharing meals and helping Lucy with her reading lessons. His knowledge of farming and his financial resources, combined with Thomas's hard work and Lucy's enthusiastic assistance, had created a collaborative arrangement that was making both properties more successful. "Uncle Jacob," Lucy called out one snowy January morning, "Papa says you might teach me how to care for the sick calf." Jacob smiled at the title that had become natural to all of them. "I'd be happy to teach you, Lucy. But first, we need to talk to your father about something important." Thomas emerged from the barn, where he had been repairing harnesses, and Jacob could see from his expression that he was still adjusting to having a partner in the daily work of farming. "Thomas, I've been thinking about our arrangement here, and I want to propose something that might sound unusual. What do you have in mind?" Jacob pulled out a folded document from his coat pocket. "I've been to see the lawyer in town, and I want to discuss making our partnership official." Thomas looked wary. "What kind of partnership?" "I want to deed half of my property to you and Lucy, not as a loan or a temporary arrangement, but as a permanent family settlement." Thomas stared at Jacob in shock. "Jacob, that's far too generous. I can't accept." "Let me explain," Jacob interrupted gently. "I'm 52 years old with no children and no close family except you and Lucy. My farm is too large for one person to manage properly, and I've been letting parts of it go to waste because I didn't have the energy or motivation to maintain it all. But your property is worth 10 times what mine is, and it's worth nothing to me if I'm working it alone," Jacob replied. "Thomas, these past few weeks have shown me something. I'd forgotten that work is better when it's shared, that meals taste better when they're eaten with family, and that success means nothing if you don't have people to celebrate it with." Lucy had been listening to this conversation with growing excitement. "Does this mean we'd really be family? Not just because of the ring, but because we'd live together?" "That's exactly what it means," Jacob confirmed. "I've had the lawyer draw up papers that would make us legal partners in both properties. We'd combine our land, our resources, and our efforts to create something bigger and better than either of us could manage alone." Thomas sat down heavily on a tree stump, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Jacob's offer. "Jacob, this is incredibly generous, but I need to understand, what do you get out of this arrangement?" Jacob's expression grew thoughtful. "I get what I've been missing for 5 years: family, purpose, and the knowledge that when I'm gone, this land will be cared for by people who understand its value. Lucy will inherit a property that can support her and her future family, instead of the struggling homestead that's all I could offer her on my own. And if we disagree about farming decisions or business matters, then we'll work it out the way family does, through discussion, compromise, and respect for each other's opinions." Jacob smiled. "I think Margaret and Sarah would approve of their families learning to collaborate instead of struggling alone." Lucy clapped her hands together. "Can we say yes, Papa, please?" Thomas looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Jacob's sincere expression, and felt something he hadn't experienced since Margaret's death: hope for a secure future. "Jacob, I need you to know that I can't match your financial contribution to this partnership. I can offer hard work, farming, knowledge, and complete dedication to making this succeed, but I don't have capital or equipment to contribute." "Thomas, you're offering something more valuable than money. You're offering to share your family with a man who thought he'd lost his chance at having one. Lucy has already given me more joy in a few weeks than I've had in 5 years." "Then, yes," Thomas said, extending his hand to shake Jacob's. Partners, that afternoon, the three of them walked the boundaries of what would become their combined property, with Jacob pointing out improvements he had been wanting to make and Thomas suggesting ways to increase productivity and efficiency. "The creek runs through both properties," Jacob noted, "so we could build a proper irrigation system that would benefit all our fields, and the southern pasture would be perfect for expanding the cattle herd." Thomas added, "We could probably double our livestock within 2 years." Lucy ran ahead of them, chasing a rabbit through the snow and calling back observations about the best places to build chicken coops and vegetable gardens. "Jacob," Thomas said as they paused to survey their combined holdings, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you think Sarah and Margaret planned this somehow? The timing of Lucy finding that ring, the way everything has worked out, it seems too perfect to be coincidence." Jacob considered the question seriously. "I think our wives spent their final years watching their families struggle alone, when we could have been helping each other, whether they planned this specific outcome or just hoped that someday we'd find each other. I believe they would be happy to see us working together. And Lucy seems to understand the significance of what's happening better than we do. Children often see solutions that adults miss because they're not complicated by pride or fear." Jacob observed, "Lucy saw 2 lonely men and decided to fix the situation with the most valuable thing she owned." That evening, as they signed the partnership papers by lamplight in the Crawford cabin, Jacob made one additional proposal that surprised both Thomas and Lucy. "I want to add one more element to our agreement," Jacob said. "I want to establish a fund for Lucy's education, enough to send her to a proper school when she's older, or even to a teacher's college if that's what she wants to pursue." "Jacob, that's not necessary." "It's completely necessary," Jacob interrupted. "Lucy's generosity changed my life and brought our families together. The least I can do is make sure she has every opportunity to develop her obvious intelligence and kindness." Lucy looked up from the arithmetic problems she was working on at the kitchen table. "Does this mean I could learn to be a real teacher someday?" "If that's what you want, Lucy, you could learn to be anything you set your mind to." As they concluded their business and prepared for bed, Jacob reflected on how completely his life had changed. Since Christmas afternoon, the ring that Lucy had given him hadn't just revealed a family connection, it had shown him that the promise he and Sarah had made to take care of each other's families could still be kept, even after death had separated them. Margaret and Sarah's long-lost promise to reconcile had finally been fulfilled, not through their own efforts, but through the generous heart of a 9-year-old girl who understood that the best Christmas gifts are the ones that bring people together rather than simply providing material comfort. 1 year after Lucy had given Jacob the ring, Paradise Valley was preparing for what had become known throughout the territory as the Miller-Crawford Christmas celebration. What had started as a private family reconciliation had grown into a community tradition that drew neighbors from homesteads dozens of miles away. The combined Miller-Crawford property had flourished under the partnership arrangement. The new irrigation system had increased crop yields significantly. The expanded cattle herd was thriving, and the property had gained a reputation as one of the most successful farming operations in Wyoming territory. But the real transformation had been in the relationships that had grown from that initial act of generosity. Jacob had discovered that being part of a family again had given him energy and purpose he thought he had lost forever, while Thomas had found that having an experienced partner had allowed him to expand his ambitions beyond mere survival. Lucy, now 10 years old and remarkably mature for her age, had become the bridge between the practical aspects of farming and the emotional needs of their small community. She had a gift for recognizing when neighbors needed help, organizing assistance, and creating connections between people who might otherwise remain isolated. "Papa, Uncle Jacob," Lucy called out from the kitchen where she was helping prepare Christmas dinner. The Henderson family just arrived, and they brought the new baby through the window. Jacob and Thomas could see a steady stream of neighbors arriving for the celebration. The tradition had begun when Jacob suggested they invite a few struggling families to share their Christmas dinner, and it had grown each year as word spread about the generous hospitality offered at the Miller-Crawford farm. "Lucy," Thomas said, "can you help Mrs. Henderson with the baby while the men tend to their horses?" "Already doing it," Papa, Lucy replied, drying her hands on her apron and heading toward the door with the confident manner of someone who had learned to anticipate needs and solve problems. Jacob watched Lucy greet their guests with genuine warmth and wondered again at the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to children who had learned early that kindness was more valuable than material possessions. Thomas, Jacob said as they prepared to join their guests, have you given any more thought to Lucy's education plans? She's definitely interested in teachers' college, but she wants to come back here afterward to start a school for the children in Paradise Valley. That sounds like Lucy always thinking about how to help the community. The afternoon celebration had become a blend of practical cooperation and genuine friendship. Families shared food. Children played together regardless of their families' economic circumstances, and adults discussed farming techniques, weather patterns, and community needs with the easy familiarity of people who had learned to depend on each other. During the gift exchange, Lucy had continued her tradition of giving something meaningful to someone who needed it. This year, she presented a hand-sewn quilt to the Hendersons, whose new baby needed warm bedding for the harsh Wyoming winter. Lucy, Mrs. Henderson said with tears in her eyes, "This is beautiful. You didn't need to give us anything so valuable. It's not really mine." Lucy replied with the matter-of-fact tone she used when explaining obvious truths. "Uncle Jacob bought the fabric. Mama taught me the stitching pattern before she died, and Papa helped me plan the design. It's really a gift from all of us." Jacob felt the familiar warmth that came whenever Lucy demonstrated the collaborative spirit that had become central to their family philosophy. She had learned to see individual success as community achievement, and her generosity inspired similar behavior in others. As the afternoon progressed, Reverend Matthews, who had traveled from town to join the celebration, asked to speak to the gathered families. "Friends," Reverend Matthews began, "I want to talk about the miracle we've witnessed here in Paradise Valley. Not the miracle of successful crops or profitable cattle, but the miracle of what happens when people choose cooperation over competition, generosity over selfishness." He gestured toward Jacob, Thomas, and Lucy, who were standing together near the fireplace. "A year ago, we had isolated families struggling separately against the challenges of frontier life. Today, we have a community that supports each other through difficult times and celebrates together during good ones." The transformation began with a child's Christmas gift, a simple ring that revealed family connections none of us knew existed. But it continued because people chose to act on that revelation, building partnerships and friendships that have strengthened everyone involved. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly widow whose homestead had been failing before the Miller-Crawford partnership, began helping their neighbors, stood up to speak. "Reverend, I want everyone to know that when my husband died last spring, I thought I'd lose the farm and have to move back east to live with relatives who didn't want me. But Jacob and Thomas organized the men to help with planting, and Lucy organized the women to help with preserving food for winter. Because of their generosity, I'm still here and the farm is profitable again." Similar testimonials came from other family stories of assistance during emergencies, collaborative work projects that benefited everyone, and the kind of community support that made frontier life not just survivable but rewarding. As the celebration wound down and families began preparing for the journey home, Lucy approached Jacob with a small wrapped package. "Uncle Jacob, I have something for you, but it's not exactly a present." Jacob opened the package to find Sarah's wedding ring, polished and carefully preserved. "Lucy, this belongs to you. It was your Christmas gift to me, I know, but I've been thinking about it all year. The ring brought us together because it helped us understand that we were family. But now that we know we belong together, maybe the ring should go to someone else who needs to find their family." Jacob looked at this remarkable 10-year-old, who continued to amaze him with her wisdom and generosity. "Do you have someone in mind?" Lucy nodded toward the Hendersons, who were bundling their new baby for the cold ride home. Mr. Henderson told Papa that he lost his mother's ring in a poker game before he met Mrs. Henderson. He's always regretted not having anything special to give her when they got married. Jacob smiled, understanding immediately what Lucy was proposing. "You want to give them the ring so Mr. Henderson can properly propose to his wife?" They're already married, but Mrs. Henderson has never had a real wedding ring, and maybe giving them the ring will help other people in our community remember that. Marriage promises are worth celebrating. Thomas joined their conversation, having overheard Lucy's proposal. Lucy, are you sure you want to give away the ring again? It's the only thing you have that connects you to both your mother and Uncle Jacob's wife. Lucy considered this seriously. Papa, I think the connection isn't really about the ring. It's about choosing to love people and take care of them. The ring was just how we learned that we were supposed to be family. Jacob knelt down to Lucy's level. Lucy, your mother and my Sarah would be very proud of the woman you're becoming. Your idea about the ring is perfect. It should keep traveling to wherever it's needed most. That evening, after presenting the ring to the amazed and grateful Hendersons, Jacob, Thomas, and Lucy sat by their fireplace reflecting on the year that had transformed their lives. Lucy, Jacob said, do you ever regret giving away your mother's ring that Christmas afternoon? Lucy looked at the two men who had become her family, at the comfortable home they had built together, and at the community of friends they had created through generosity and cooperation. No, Uncle Jacob, I think giving away the ring was how I learned that the best way to keep something precious is to share it with people who need it. We have everything we need right here. As snow began to fall outside their warm home, the three of them understood that Margaret and Sarah's long-lost promise had been fulfilled in ways neither sister could have imagined. The ring would continue its journey, carrying with it the lesson that love multiplies when it's shared, and that the strongest families are often the ones created by choice rather than accident. Years later, when Lucy became the Valley's first teacher and established a school that served homestead children from across the territory, she would tell her students the story of a Christmas ring that revealed family connections and taught everyone involved that generosity creates more abundance than hoarding ever could. The ring itself would pass through many hands over the years, but its legacy would remain in Paradise Valley, a community that had learned to celebrate cooperation, support each other through difficulties, and remember that the most valuable gifts are always the ones that bring Pio Pletigere.